Get out! Black girl from Cloverdale wants a black belt!
Ryan Holloway didn't even let her finish walking through the door. He saw her cross the floor in 6 steps and snatched the registration form straight out of her hand before she could set it on the counter. He read it for 3 seconds. Then he laughed, short, sharp, the kind of laugh that wasn't meant to be funny, and held it up for the entire room to see. Black girl from Cloverdale wants a black belt. He dropped his voice into something slow and deliberate, like he was explaining something obvious to someone slow. Sweetheart, I've seen how y'all fight in the streets. That's not martial arts. That's just anger with no technique. And anger with no technique gets people hurt on my mat. He looked her up and down once, top to bottom, the way someone looks at something they're about to throw away. You're not even worth a round. You'd be a liability. An injury report waiting to happen. He dropped the form on the floor at her feet. Go find a dance studio that'll take anyone with a pulse. This mat has standards. 30 people heard every word. Some laughed. A few looked at the floor. Jade looked at the form lying at her feet. Then she looked at the wall directly behind Holloway, at a framed photograph she recognized better than her own reflection. She bent down, picked up the form, folded it once, put it in her pocket, said nothing. Because in 30 seconds on the day that mattered, every single word Ryan Holloway just said would come back and bury him alive. Don't scroll past this one. Drop your location and local time in the comments, right now. I want to know where in the world you're watching from. Stay with this story, because what Jade does next is something nobody in that room saw coming. And if this channel isn't in your subscriptions yet, fix that now. You won't want to miss what's coming. Savannah, Georgia sits close enough to the Atlantic that on certain mornings you can smell salt in the air before you open your eyes. The city is beautiful, the way old things are beautiful, full of history, moss-covered squares, wrought iron gates, and wide boulevards, where the light falls golden in the late afternoon. Cloverdale is not that part of Savannah. Cloverdale sits on the southeast edge of the city, past the point where tourist maps stop printing street names. The roads crack and heave in summer. The streetlights work on a schedule nobody has figured out. The houses lean slightly the way houses lean when they have been standing too long without anyone paying attention to them. It is the kind of neighborhood described by what it is missing. No grocery store within walking distance. No maintained park, no bus line running past 9 at night. Jade Monroe had lived there her entire life. She was 24 years old, 5'4", 131 pounds. She had her father's jaw and her grandmother's eyes, sharp, dark, patient, in a way that people sometimes mistook for sadness. She was not sad. She was tired, which is a different thing entirely. Tired the way you get when you have been holding everything up for so long that you stop noticing the weight. Her alarm went off at 5:15 every morning. By 6, she was at a warehouse on the south end of Savannah, scanning boxes and loading pallets for $1 above minimum wage. She worked until 2 in the afternoon. Then she went home, changed, ate whatever was in the refrigerator, and checked on her grandmother before heading back out. Cora Monroe was 74 years old and had been diagnosed with stage 3 chronic kidney disease 14 months ago. 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, she sat in a dialysis center on Whitaker Street for 4 hours while a machine did the work her kidneys no longer could. Her insurance covered a portion. The portion it did not cover came to $900 a month. Jade paid it. She paid it with a second job, office cleaning, for a commercial janitorial company, servicing 3 buildings downtown. She started at 8 in the evening and finished past 1 in the morning. 5 nights a week. She never missed a shift. She never asked for a day off. She took the bus both ways because the car she once owned had been sold 8 months ago when the first medical bills arrived. She had not complained about this to anyone. Not to Cora, who would have spent her remaining energy feeling responsible. Not to co-workers who had their own problems. Not to herself, because she had learned early that complaining to yourself is the most useless conversation a person can have. What she did instead was keep a photograph in her wallet, small, worn, soft at the corners from years of handling. It showed a man in a white broad-shouldered, calm-faced, standing on tatami with his arms at his sides. Beside him, barely reaching his elbow, stood a girl of 7 wearing a 3 sizes too large, grinning at the camera with one front tooth missing. The man was Shihan Earl Monroe. The girl was Jade. On the back, in her father's careful handwriting, the mat always tells the truth. Earl Monroe had died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer diagnosed in January, gone by August. He was 58 years old. He had never made much money. He had never owned a house. He had spent 30 years teaching in a basement dojo on Hartridge Street, charging what people could afford, and waiving the fee entirely when they could afford nothing. He was the finest martial artist Jade had ever seen in her life. She had never told him that directly. She had always assumed there would be more time. There was not more time. After he died, she stopped competing. She kept training alone in the one-car garage behind Cora's house with the overhead light that buzzed and flickered, and the heavy bag her father had hung from a ceiling beam years ago. She trained late at night after the buses stopped running after Cora was asleep. She wrapped her hands from memory and worked through every combination, every throw, every transition her father had ever taught her. Because stopping entirely would have meant admitting something she was not yet ready to admit. But she did not enter tournaments, did not step inside another dojo, not once in 3 years. Until the medical bills arrived. The Georgia State Open Martial Arts Championship had been running for 11 years, the largest regional open-style tournament in the Southeast, drawing competitors from 6 states across 4 weight classes. First prize in the open division, $10,000. Alongside it, an $8,000 scholarship towards certified instructor training with a national athletics organization. $18,000 total. Cora's dialysis covered for the next 20 months. Jade had found the flyer taped outside the dialysis center between a notice about a missing cat and a business card for a tax preparer. She stood in front of it for a long time without reaching for it. To compete, a fighter needed official verification from a recognized affiliated dojo. The head instructor had to countersign the registration form and confirm the competitor's credentials in writing. There was one affiliated dojo in all of Savannah, Holloway Martial Arts Academy. Jade took the flyer, folded it into her jacket pocket, and rode the bus home without a word to anyone. That night, she opened the bottom drawer of her father's old dresser, kept locked since the day he died, and took out a small black notebook with a cracked spine. She turned to the last page, read the words written there once slowly. Then she closed it and held it against her chest in the dark for a long time. The next morning, she walked into Holloway Academy. She did not walk back out the way she expected. To understand what Jade Monroe carried onto that mat, you first have to understand the man who built her. Shihan Earl Monroe was not famous. He was not on television. He did not have a YouTube channel or a sponsorship deal or a wall covered in photographs of himself standing next to celebrities. He had a basement, a set of mats he had bought secondhand in 1994, and 30 years of knowledge that he gave away freely to anyone who was willing to show up. He had earned his 6th-degree black belt in judo through the United States Judo Federation, one of fewer than 40 people in the country to hold that rank at the time of his certification. He held a 4th-degree black belt in Hapkido. He had been named USJF Instructor of the Year in 2009, an award he received in a hotel ballroom in Atlanta, thanked the committee in 4 sentences, and never mentioned again. The certificate went into his desk drawer the following morning. It stayed there until the day he died. When people asked him why he did not display it, he said the same thing every time. The students don't come here to see my paper. They come here to learn. Those are two different things. His dojo had no sign. Monroe Martial Arts operated out of the basement of Second Baptist Church on Hartridge Street, with the permission of the pastor who had been one of Earl's first adult students in 1997. The ceiling was low. The lighting was institutional. In summer it held heat like a kiln, and in winter the old radiator in the corner knocked and hissed through every session. Earl charged $20 a month for children and $30 for adults. If a student could not pay, he did not ask twice. He simply said, "Come back Thursday," and left it there. He had trained over 200 students in 3 decades. Most of them had no interest in competition. They were nurses, mechanics, teachers, teenagers from Cloverdale and surrounding neighborhoods who needed somewhere safe to go after school. Earl gave them that. He gave them technique, yes, but more than that, he gave them a vocabulary for their own bodies, a sense that they were capable of more than the world around them suggested. Among all of them, Jade was different. Earl recognized it the first time he put her on the mat at 4 years old, holding her small hands and walking her through a basic breakfall. She had no fear of falling. Most children flinch when the ground comes up. Jade went down, slapped the mat the way he showed her, and looked up, grinning. "Again," she said. He trained her for 17 years. By the time she was 18, she had earned her first-degree black belt in judo. By 20, she held a second degree. At 22, she completed her Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, a process that typically takes a decade and which she finished in 8 years because she trained 6 days a week without being asked. Earl called her the most technically complete student he had ever produced. He wrote that in the black notebook he kept on his desk in the column next to her name in ink that had faded slightly now from the years. The notebook itself was a record of every student Earl had ever taught. Names, enrollment dates, belt levels, notable observations. He had started it in 1995 with 17 entries and filled it steadily until the year he died. It was not organized by skill or achievement. It was organized by date of first attendance, because Earl believed that showing up was the most important thing a person could do and deserved to be recorded first. Jade kept the notebook after he died. She kept it in the bottom drawer of his old dresser, alongside the things she had not been able to bring herself to sort through his worn hand wraps. His reading glasses, a folded program from a tournament he had refereed in 2004. She had not opened it in 2 years. The last entry in the notebook was dated 4 days before Earl was moved to hospice care. It was not about a student. It was about Jade. She is ready. She has been ready since she was 22. Everything she needs, she already has. She just needs one reason to walk back in. When that reason comes, and it will come, she will not hesitate. That is not the kind of person I raised. Below that, in slightly shakier handwriting, as if he had added it a day later, the mat always tells the truth. I taught her that. She believed it. That's enough. For 3 years after his death, Jade trained alone in the garage. No audience, no sparring partner, no coach. Just the buzzing overhead light and the bag and the muscle memory her father had spent 17 years building into her body. She drilled throws against a grappling dummy until the mat beneath it was dark with sweat. She ran combinations until her knuckles ached through the wraps. She did not do it to stay sharp for competition. She did it because it was the only place left where she could still hear his voice. Keep your hips low. Don't telegraph the entry. Trust your base. When she opened the notebook the night she found the tournament flyer and read those final words in the lamplight of Cora's bedroom, she sat still for a long time. Then she put the notebook back in the drawer. carefully, like setting something down that she intended to pick back up. The next morning, she got on the bus, rode 14 stops north, and pushed open the glass door of Holloway Martial Arts Academy. She brought her credentials. She brought her registration form. She brought the photograph from her wallet tucked against her chest. She did not yet know that inside that building hanging on a wall she had never seen was a face she had known her entire life. Ryan Holloway had been in the martial arts business for 15 years, and in that time, he had developed a precise understanding of the difference between a student and a customer. Students were unpredictable. They asked hard questions. They challenged technique. They sometimes outgrew their instructor and had the honesty to say so. Customers renewed their membership on the first of every month and told their friends. Holloway preferred customers. His academy occupied a renovated commercial space on Abercorn Street. High ceilings, climate control, new mats replaced every 3 years, a reception desk staffed during all operating hours. The website described it as Georgia's premier martial arts training center. The photographs on the website showed smiling students in clean white GIs arranged in rows by belt rank, standing in front of the Holloway Academy banner. Not a single face in those photographs looked like Jade Monroe's. That was not an accident. Holloway held a 4th-degree black belt certified through a private regional federation that he had helped found in 2012 and whose certification process he had also helped design. He had competed in his 20s with moderate success, a handful of regional titles, 1 state championship in a division with 4 entrants. He was technically competent. He understood mechanics. He could teach fundamentals to beginners and intermediate students without issue. What Ryan Holloway could not do was what the best martial artists can always do: adapt in real time under pressure against a person who was genuinely better than him. He had not been tested that way in years. He had made certain of it the morning Jade walked in. Holloway was running a class of 12 intermediate students through a drilling sequence. He saw her come through the door, and he did what he always did when someone new entered. He assessed. 1 look top to bottom, 2 seconds, conclusion filed. He crossed the floor, took the form from her hand before she had finished extending it. What followed was what Jade had already described to you. The form dropped at her feet. The words loud enough for the room. Not even worth a round. Go find a dance studio that'll take anyone with a pulse. This mat has standards. After Jade left, Holloway turned back to his class. Nobody spoke. He picked up where he had left off with the drilling sequence as if nothing had happened. That evening, he posted to the Academy's Instagram story without using Jade's name. He was careful about that, always careful in the specific way people are careful when they know exactly what they are doing. A vague caption, a knowing tone. Some people walk in expecting a trophy just for showing up. Standards exist for a reason. A laughing emoji at the end. 1,200 people liked it within 2 hours. What Holloway did not notice, what he had never once thought to notice in the 5 years that photograph had hung on his wall, was the framed image on the east side of the main training room, hung between a mounted trophy case and a whiteboard schedule. It was a black and white photograph, 8 inches by 10, in a simple dark frame. It showed a man in a GI, standing on a competition mat, arms at his sides, expression composed. It was the kind of photograph that read as atmosphere, a piece of martial arts heritage, the sort of image purchased from a stock archive or a memorabilia catalog, to give a space the feeling of tradition and depth. Holloway had bought it 7 years ago from an online seller who described it as vintage American judo competition era. He had paid $32, including shipping. He had hung it there because the wall needed something, and he thought it looked right. He had never known who was in the photograph. His business partner knew. Mike Tanaka had been teaching at Holloway Academy for 6 years. He had joined the staff after a decade of competing regionally, drawn to the position by the facility and the salary and the promise of a head instructor role that had never fully materialized. He was 39 years old, quiet, meticulous, the kind of man who noticed things other people walked past without looking at. When Jade Monroe walked into the academy that morning and Holloway took the form from her hand, Mike was in the back office reviewing enrollment paperwork. He heard the exchange through the open door. He did not come out. He had learned over 6 years when involvement would help, and when it would only make things worse. But when Jade glanced at the east wall before she left, when her eyes found the framed photograph and stayed there for a fraction of a second longer than a person looks at wallpaper, Mike saw it. He recognized that look. It was the look of someone seeing a face they knew in a place they did not expect to find it. He waited until the evening class ended and everyone had gone. Then he stood in front of the photograph alone for the first time in a long time and looked at it the way he should have looked at it years ago. The man in the photograph was standing on a competition mat at what appeared to be a regional tournament. In the background, slightly out of focus, was a banner that read, Georgia Judo Championships 1998. Mike had competed in that tournament. He had been 17 years old, a junior division entry eliminated in the second round by a throw so clean and so fast that he had stood up afterward and looked around the room as if something had been taken from him that he did not know how to name. The man who threw him that day was Earl Monroe. Mike stood in front of the photograph for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and dialed a number he had not called in almost 2 years. It rang 3 times. "Mike," said the voice on the other end. "I was wondering when you'd call." Mike Tanaka found Jade in the parking lot. She was standing beside the bus stop at the end of the block, not sitting, just standing with her hands in her jacket pockets and her eyes on the middle distance. The registration form was folded in her pocket. She had not unfolded it since she left the building. Mike came up beside her quietly. He was not a man who announced himself. "Your father trained me," he said. No preamble. No apology for following her out. 2007 and 2008. I was 21. I had been training for 4 years, by then thought I knew more than I did. He paused. He fixed that in about 3 sessions. Most patient teacher I ever had. And the most technically honest. He looked at her. He was the best I ever learned from. I want you to know that. Jade looked at him for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes, brief and controlled. "Thank you," she said. "Your credentials are valid," Mike said. "More than valid. I looked up your USJF registration from my phone before you reached the door. Everything checks out." He glanced back toward the building. "Come back tomorrow morning at 7 before Holloway gets in. I'll process your paperwork myself." Jade studied him. "He'll cancel it." "He can't," Mike said. "My name is on the operating license as co-instructor of record. I have equal authority to approve competitive registrations. He knows that. He just hopes most people don't." The following morning, Jade returned at 7. Mike had the forms ready. He countersigned them, affixed the academy stamp, and filed the copies before Holloway arrived at 8:30. When Holloway saw the completed paperwork on his desk, he stood in the doorway of his office for a long moment without speaking. Then he walked to his class and said nothing about it for the rest of the day. But something shifted in how he looked at Jade during sessions. Holloway was a man who did not tolerate situations he could not control, and so when he found one, he found a way to reframe it. He could not remove her. He could not discredit her paperwork. What he could do was make her useful in a different way. The second class Jade attended was a Wednesday evening session, 31 students, a mixed intermediate and advanced group. Holloway was running stand-up techniques, Partner drills controlled sparring in the final 30 minutes. Halfway through the session, he stopped the class. "Monroe," he said loud across the room. "Let's see what you've got. You and Tyler. Center mat." It was not phrased as an invitation. Tyler Voss was 23 years old, 6 feet 190 pounds. He held a first-degree black belt that Holloway had issued personally after 2 years of training, fast promotion by most standards, though nobody inside the academy said that out loud. Tyler was the kind of student who trained hard enough to be genuinely skilled and confidently enough to confuse skill with dominance. He had won 3 local tournaments in the past 18 months. He walked to the center mat with the comfortable stride of a man who had never been seriously challenged in his own building. Before they began, Tyler took his time. He rolled his neck slowly, each side 2 rotations. Then his shoulders forward and back. Then he dropped into a deep hip flexor stretch, one knee on the mat, arms overhead, held it for a full 12 seconds, exhaled loudly. Then he stood, shook out his legs one at a time, rolled his wrists, bounced on his toes 4 times. In the back row, a 15-year-old student named Darnell leaned toward the kid beside him and whispered, barely audible, "Why is he stretching like he's going to fight a bear?" The kid beside him pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling. At the edge of the mat, Mike Tanaka turned slightly toward the wall and coughed once into his fist. Tyler stepped toward Jade. He dropped his voice low, not quite a whisper, just quiet enough to be deniable. "I'll give you 30 seconds before you tap," he said. "That's me being generous." Jade did not respond. She looked past him for a brief moment toward the east wall of the training room, toward the framed photograph that hung between the trophy case and the schedule board. The calm face, the white GI, the arms at the sides. Then she turned back to Tyler, settled her weight, and waited. Holloway crossed his arms. He nodded once to a student near the edge of the room who had his phone in his hand. The student raised it slightly and pressed record. "Let's see," Holloway said quietly enough for only the front row to hear. "What Earl Monroe really taught you." The room went still. 31 people held their positions. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning unit above the back door and the soft tap of Jade's bare feet settling on the mat. She did not look at Holloway. She did not look at the camera. She looked at Tyler Voss, and she waited with the particular stillness of someone who already knows how the next few minutes are going to go and is simply allowing them to arrive. Tyler moved first. 90 seconds. That was how long it lasted. And in those 90 seconds, Tyler Voss did not land a single meaningful strike. He came in fast at the start, which was his habit. Pressure, early established dominance, let the other person feel the weight of his forward movement. He threw a sharp jab combination followed by a level change reaching for a double leg takedown. It was technically sound. It was the sequence he had used to finish his last 2 tournament matches. Jade was not there when he arrived. She had not stepped back. She had moved laterally 1 step at precisely the moment his weight committed forward and his hands closed on empty air. He recovered quickly, he was athletic enough for that, and pivoted to face her. She was already reset, balanced, watching him with the same expression she had worn before the round began. He tried again. A low kick to the outside of her lead leg followed by a cross. The kick landed on her thigh with a dull sound. She absorbed it without shifting her weight and rolled the cross over her shoulder, redirecting his arm past her ear. His momentum carried him a half step forward. Her left hand brushed his back as he passed, not grabbing, not pushing, just there, measuring. He understood by the third exchange that something was wrong. Not wrong in a way he could name immediately. Wrong in the way that the floor feels wrong when you step onto ice expecting concrete. Every angle he chose, she was already occupying the correct counter position before he could establish the attack. She was not reacting. She was reading. There was a full second of difference between those two things, and in a 90-second sparring round, that second is everything. He pushed harder. A spinning back kick, his best technique, the one that had gotten him the loudest reactions in his tournament highlight videos. He loaded his weight onto his left leg, coiled, launched. Jade stepped inside the rotation. His foot passed 6 inches behind her shoulder. She felt the air move against the back of her neck, and she was already past it in his blind spot. Her hand resting briefly on his arm as he came back around, not holding, not locking, just resting as if marking where she had been. Tyler stopped moving for half a second. That was not something he did. Then Jade stepped back. One clear step backward out of range. She lowered her hands to her sides. She turned slightly toward him, inclined her head, a brief, precise bow, the kind Earl Monroe had drilled into her from the time she was 6 years old. The kind that meant the round is finished, and I thank you for it. She had ended it herself, without being told. The room was silent for 4 full seconds. Then Holloway uncrossed his arms and raised his voice. Tyler was going easy, he said. The words came quickly with the practiced ease of a man who had prepared them before the round began. Controlled sparring. That's the point of a drill. It doesn't prove anything. He clapped once, sharp and authoritative. Reset. Next pair. Nobody moved immediately. There was a particular quality to the silence, not the silence of agreement, but the silence of people who were thinking something they had not yet decided whether to say. Then the room began to reorganize itself, and the moment passed. What Holloway did not see, because he was already turning back toward the center of the mat, was a 16-year-old student named Amara Washington, lowering her phone from eye level and quietly pressing stop. Amara had joined Holloway Academy 8 months ago, with her mother's careful savings and a hope that the place would be what the website described. It was mostly fine. The instruction was adequate, the environment was manageable. But she had been watching Ryan Holloway run his dojo for 8 months, and she had noticed certain things. And when Jade Monroe had walked in 2 weeks ago and been spoken to the way Holloway had spoken to her, Amara had decided, without consciously deciding, that she was going to pay close attention. She had filmed every second of the 90-second round from the corner of the room phone angled low. That night, sitting on her bed with her homework unfinished beside her, she posted the video to TikTok. She did not add a caption with analysis. She did not name anyone. She typed 7 words, "This happened at my dojo today." Then she put her phone down and went to sleep. By 6 the following morning, the video had 240,000 views. Comments filled faster than the platform could load them. Who is she? Where did she train? Did he really say that before the round? Why did the instructor shut it down so fast? Share this. Someone find her name. This needs to be seen. By 9, Holloway had seen it. He called Amara into his office before the first class of the day. His voice was controlled and quiet and very precise, the way voices get when anger has been disciplined into something more dangerous than shouting. He told her the video violated the Academy's media policy. He told her it misrepresented a routine training exercise. He told her it needed to come down immediately, or her enrollment would be reviewed. Amara deleted the original. By then, 314 people had already saved and reposted it. That afternoon, Holloway called Frank Ossie at the tournament office. The conversation was brief and one-sided. Holloway spoke about credential irregularities, about liability concerns, about the reputation of the event. Ossie listened. At the end of the call, he said he would look into it. 2 days later, Jade received an email during her night cleaning shift. Official tournament letterhead. Competitive registration suspended pending credential review. She read it twice in the empty corridor of the third-floor office building, the vacuum cleaner running behind her. Then she turned the screen off and stood very still for a moment in the buzzing fluorescent light. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail. Ms. Monroe. The voice was clear, unhurried, professional. My name is Renee Caldwell. I'm an attorney based in Savannah. I've been trying to reach you since this morning. A brief pause. I think you should hear what I have to say before you respond to that email. Renee Caldwell was 41 years old and had been practicing civil rights and sports law for 14 years. She had a reputation in Savannah for taking cases other attorneys found inconvenient and for winning them with a thoroughness that made opposing counsel reluctant to face her a second time. She had also, for 2 years, in 2003 and 2004, trained at Monroe Martial Arts on Hartridge Street. She had been 22 at the time, a second-year law student, with 3 evenings a week free, and a desire to learn something that had nothing to do with case law. She had found Earl Monroe's basement dojo through a flyer at a laundromat. She had walked in expecting a basic self-defense class, and discovered instead a man who taught movement the way good teachers teach everything, by asking you to understand why before he showed you how. When she stopped training at the end of 2004, she tried to pay the back fees she had deferred. Earl refused. You showed up every time, he told her. That's the only thing I asked. She had not forgotten that. Some things sit in a person for 20 years and do not diminish. When Amara's video appeared on her timeline shared by a former client, who tagged it with 2 words, "Is this legal?" Renee had watched it 4 times before she recognized something in the way Jade Monroe moved. A particular quality of hip placement on the lateral step. The way the hands settled after a redirect, not dropped, not raised, just present. She had seen that specific combination of habits exactly once before in her life. She had called Cora Monroe's landline the same afternoon. Cora answered on the second ring. When Renee explained who she was and how she knew Earl, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Cora said, "Hold on. I need to get something." They met 2 evenings later, Renee, Jade, and Cora at the kitchen table in Cora's house on the edge of Cloverdale. Cora set a padded envelope on the table, yellowed along one edge, sealed with tape that had dried and gone brittle. Jade's name was written on the front in her father's handwriting. He gave this to me 2 weeks before they moved him to hospice, Cora said. Her voice was steady in the way old voices get steady, not without feeling, but past the point where feeling spills over. He said keep it until Jade needs it. He said she would know when. Jade looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then she opened it. The first document was a certification letter from the United States Judo Federation, dated March 2011. It confirmed the promotion of Earl James Monroe to 6th degree black belt with commendation for 22 years of active instruction and contribution to the development of competitive judo in the Southeast. It bore the official Federation seal and the signature of the national director. The second was a citation from the Georgia State Athletic Commission, dated 2014, recognizing Monroe Martial Arts as a distinguished community training program, and Earl Monroe personally for 2 decades of youth development work. The third document was a single sheet of paper, handwritten with the heading Students of Note Earl Monroe, Monroe Martial Arts, Hartridge Street, Savannah, Georgia. 12 names, dates of enrollment, belt ranks issued, a brief notation beside each. Renee put her finger on the first name at the top of the list. Ryan T. Holloway. Enrolled October 2003. First-degree black belt in judo issued under Earl Monroe's certification and Federation seal. September 12, 2005. Promotion witnessed by M. Tanaka, and D. Osei. Jade read the name, read it again, set the paper down on the table and sat back in her chair. He knew, she said, not a question. He knew the whole time, Renee said. Ryan Holloway's 4th degree certification had come later through the private federation he co-founded. But his first black belt, the foundation of everything he had built, had been issued by the man he had publicly dismissed as an informal instructor with no recognized standing. Renee reached into her bag and placed one more item on the table. It was a check. Personal check drawn on Earl Monroe's account, made out to Ryan T. Holloway, dated October 2005. The amount was $240, the equivalent of 8 months of deferred training fees. In the memo line in Earl's handwriting, balance owed returned per student withdrawal. Paper-clipped to the back of the check was a small note card. 4 lines, in the same careful hand. Ryan left before completing the advanced curriculum. Withdrew without notice, October 2005. Refund prepared. Held in case he returns to finish. The check had never been cashed. Earl Monroe had kept it in his files for 18 years, waiting for a student who never came back. Jade stared at that note card for a long time. At the 4 lines. At the patience contained in them, the specific patient quality of a man who believed that people could be better than their worst moments, and who kept a door open for them long after they had stopped deserving it. Cora put her hand over Jade's on the table. Neither of them spoke. "There's one more thing," Renee said. She had her phone in her hand. "I called Mike Tanaka this afternoon. His name is on the witness line of the promotion certificate. I asked him if he remembered the day." She pressed play. Mike's voice came through the speaker clear and even. "September 12th, 2005. Hartridge Street, basement. I was standing 3 feet from Shehan Monroe when he tied that belt around Ryan Holloway's waist." Holloway shook his hand. He said thank you. Shehan Monroe told him to come back for the advanced session the following month. A pause. He never did. Cora squeezed Jade's hand once. Her eyes were dry, but her grip was firm. "Your daddy knew this day would come," she said quietly. "That's why he kept records." Jade sat with that for a moment. Then she looked at Renee. "What do we do now?" Renee closed her folder. Her voice was the voice of someone who had already decided in the quiet hours before this meeting exactly how this was going to go. "Tomorrow morning," she said, "I call Frank Osei, and this time I'm not asking him to review anything." She paused. "I'm notifying him of what happens next if he doesn't." Renee Caldwell called Frank Osei at 8:15 the following morning. The call lasted 11 minutes. She did not raise her voice at any point. She did not make threats in the language of threats. She simply presented information in the order it needed to be presented. The USJF certification, the student record, the witness confirmation from Mike Tanaka, and then she told Osei, with the particular clarity she reserved for moments when clarity was the most powerful available tool, exactly what the alternative looked like. The alternative looked like a civil rights filing against the Georgia State Open Martial Arts Championship for facilitating the discriminatory removal of a credentialed black competitor based on false claims submitted by a sponsor with a documented conflict of interest. It looked like a press release to every sports media outlet in the Southeast. It looked like Amara's video now approaching 400,000 views across its reposted versions, playing on a loop in every story written about the tournament for the next calendar year. Osei reinstated Jade's registration before 9 o'clock. He sent the confirmation email himself. Holloway received the forwarded copy at 9:17. He read it standing at his desk, set his phone face down on the surface, and walked to his office window. He stood there for a while looking at the parking lot below. Mike Tanaka, passing in the hallway, saw him through the glass and kept walking without slowing down. The Georgia State Open Martial Arts Championship took place on a Saturday in early November in a convention center on the west side of Savannah that smelled of floor wax and industrial coffee. The main competition hall seated 1,500. By 10 in the morning, every seat was taken. Another 100 people stood along the back wall. The tournament's official livestream showed 28,000 concurrent viewers before the first match of the day had even begun. Jade arrived alone. Renee had offered to come. Mike had offered to come. She had thanked both of them and said no. She took the bus, walked 4 blocks from the stop, checked in at the registration table, and found an empty corridor bench to wrap her hands. She wrapped them with Earl's hand wraps, white cotton faded to the color of old paper, fraying at 2 edges, too large for her hands by a small margin. She wrapped them anyway, fold by fold, the way he had shown her at age 7. She put on her GI. Plain white, no embroidery, no academy name on the back. And around her waist, she tied her father's 2nd-degree black belt, washed so many times the color had gone soft, the fabric carrying the particular weight that only years of honest use can give a thing. She walked into the competition hall. Nobody announced her. She moved through the preliminary rounds with the same quality she had shown in the Holloway sparring session, controlled, efficient, nothing performed. 3 matches before the final. The longest lasted 2 minutes and 40 seconds. The shortest ended before the minute mark. The final was Jade Monroe versus Tyler Voss. Holloway had not arranged the bracket. The draw was random, as it always was. Tyler had earned his way to the final on his own. He arrived at the center mat in full Holloway Academy GI navy blue silver trim, the Academy name across the back in block letters. He looked composed. He was genuinely composed. He was a skilled fighter, and he had spent the 2 weeks since the sparring session training harder than he had trained in the previous 6 months. Because something about those 90 seconds had settled in him like a splinter he could not locate. Jade stepped to center mat. The murmuring in the crowd lasted 4 seconds, and then went quiet. The referee raised his hand. Both competitors bowed. Tyler came in with a grip fight, both hands reaching for collar and sleeve control, trying to establish dominant grips before she could. His grip training was strong. Against most opponents, he won that exchange in the first 3 seconds, and the match was functionally decided. Jade let him find her left collar. The moment his right hand closed on the fabric, she turned her hip, stepped her right foot across his center line, and secured his sleeve. It happened in under 2 seconds. He felt his balance shift before his brain registered why. Her right shoulder dropped. Her hips loaded and drove through. Ippon seoi nage, a shoulder throw drilled 10,000 times on a cold basement mat since the age of 7. Tyler's feet left the ground at the 18-second mark. He was airborne for less than a second. His back met the mat with a sound that carried to the back of the hall, flat, absolute, the sound of mass meeting surface without resistance. Jade was already moving. The transition from throw to groundwork took 4 seconds, hips through arm isolated extension, applied with steady, even pressure. At 24 seconds, Tyler felt the joint reach its limit. At 29 seconds, his free hand struck the mat twice. The referee stepped in. Ippon. At the scoring table, the official looked at his stopwatch, then at his score sheet, then at his stopwatch again. He picked up his pen, wrote the time, paused, crossed it out, and wrote it again. He underlined it once. The man sitting directly behind him in the front row had watched all of it. He leaned to his left and said quietly to the woman beside him, "Did he just fact-check his own stopwatch?" She had already started clapping before anyone else in the hall caught up. Then, 1,500 people stood up at once, and the sound filled every corner of the room from floor to ceiling. Jade stood at center mat. She bowed to Tyler, to the referee, to the table. She touched her father's belt once with her fingertips, one brief, deliberate contact, and walked off the mat to the nearest bench and sat down. Across the hall, Ryan Holloway was already moving toward the tournament microphone. The livestream moderator had switched the floor microphone to active feed at the start of the final match, and had not switched it off. It was a procedural oversight, the kind that happens at live events when attention is on the competition floor and the technical checklist falls a step behind. On most days, it would have had no consequences. On this particular day, Ryan Holloway walked toward that microphone with his tournament credential lanyard around his neck and his assistant 2 steps behind him. Before he reached the stand, he turned slightly and said in a voice meant for a 3-foot conversation, "How do I look? Is my collar straight?" 28,000 people heard it at the same time. The livestream comment section, which had been scrolling steadily for the past hour, underwent a sudden change in character. "Burrow is worried about his collar right now. The man's entire world is on fire, and he's asking about his collar. Collargate, sir. Sir, the collar is genuinely the least of your problems tonight." Holloway reached the microphone, adjusted it to his height, and began to speak. His voice was measured, controlled, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this at least partially, and who understood that tone mattered as much as content. "I'd like to raise a formal objection to the result of the Open Division Final," he said. "The competing fighters' credentials originate from an unaffiliated training program operating without recognized federation standing. The techniques demonstrated are not consistent with any certified curriculum. This tournament has an obligation to its competitors and sponsors to maintain standards, and those standards require sensei." The voice came from the competition floor. Tyler Voss was still on the mat. Towel in one hand, weight on one leg, body not yet fully convinced it was done with the last 30 seconds. He was looking directly at Holloway across the hall. "Stop," he said. Not loudly, not with anger. Just clearly, the way someone says a word when they mean only that word and nothing attached to it. "Hey, she beat me fair. I felt every second of it. The throw was clean, the transition was clean. I tapped because I was caught, and I knew it." He paused. "Everyone in this building watched the same match I did." The hall went silent in the specific way it goes silent when something unexpected and true has been said in a public space. Not the silence of shock, but the silence of recognition, of people feeling a thing they already knew being confirmed out loud. Holloway's mouth stayed open for a moment. Then it closed. He had prepared for resistance from the table, for legal friction from Renee, for pushback from Osei. He had not prepared for Tyler Voss, his best student, his most visible competitor, the face of his academy's marketing for 2 years, standing on a competition mat in front of 1,500 people and telling him to stop. Before Holloway could respond, Mike Tanaka was at the secondary microphone near the scoring table. "My name is Mike Tanaka," he said. "I am an instructor of record at Holloway Academy. I have been on staff there for 6 years. He looked at Holloway steadily across the room. "Ryan, I was present on September 12, 2005 at Monroe Martial Arts on Hartridge Street in Savannah, Georgia. I watched Shihan Earl Monroe tie your first-degree black belt around your waist. You shook his hand. You said thank you. His name was on your certification. His federation seal was on your paperwork. I signed that document as a witness." He let that sit for a moment. "That is the same man whose credentials you asked this tournament to reject." Renee Caldwell was already at the presentation screen. A technician she had briefed that morning connected her laptop without being asked twice. 3 documents appeared on the display enlarged side by side. The first, Earl Monroe's USJF 6th degree certification 2011. The second, the student record. Ryan Holloway, 1st degree black belt. September 2005. Issued under Earl Monroe. Witnessed by M. Tanaka. The third, 2 signed complaint forms from former Holloway Academy students. Both black. Both describing instances of denied advancement and unexplained removal from programs. Both had accepted financial settlements in exchange for silence. Both had recently decided that silence was no longer something they were willing to hold. The screen sat in the full light of the hall, visible to 1,500 people in the room and 28,000 watching from wherever they were in the world. Holloway stood at the microphone. He said nothing. The color had gone out of his face in the way it goes when the body redirects its resources towards something more urgent than appearance. His hands at his sides were very still. Frank Ossie stepped to the main microphone. "The result of the Open Division Final stands," he said. "Jade Monroe is the Georgia State Open champion." A brief pause directed briefly toward Holloway. Holloway Academy's tournament affiliation is suspended effective immediately pending a full review of the credential complaint process and the conduct described in the documentation just entered into the record. He stepped back. Holloway replaced the microphone in its stand. He turned and walked toward the exit corridor, the crowd parting in front of him without sound. At the corridor entrance, mounted on the tournament's historical display board, was a framed photograph part of the martial arts heritage display that Frank Ossie assembled each year from archival materials. Earl Monroe White GI Competition Mat 1998, enlarged this year to 16 by 20 inches. Name printed clearly beneath it for the first time. Shehan Earl Monroe, USJF Instructor of the Year 2009. Monroe Martial Arts, Savannah, Georgia. Holloway stopped in front of it. He stood there for 3 seconds, perhaps 4. Long enough for 2 people nearby to notice and look at each other without speaking. Then he walked through the corridor door, and it closed behind him. And that was the last time Ryan Holloway stood on a competition floor in the state of Georgia. Renee's phone rang before she had crossed the hall. She looked at the screen, a number she recognized from 2 previous cases, a national martial arts governing body. She answered. "Ms. Caldwell," said the voice. "We've been watching the live stream. We'd like to discuss something not about Mr. Holloway." A brief pause. "About Ms. Monroe." The money arrived on a Tuesday. $10,000 from the Georgia State Open transferred to the account Renee had set up during the week following the tournament. Alongside it, the $8,000 scholarship confirmation, certified instructor training, 12-month program, start date flexible. Jade was at the dialysis center when the notification came through on her phone. Cora was in her chair beside the machine, a magazine open on her lap that she was not really reading. Jade sat in the adjacent chair the way she always sat, close enough to reach her hand, far enough not to crowd her. She looked at the notification, then she turned the phone face down on her knee and sat with it for a moment. Then she took Cora's hand. Her grandmother looked up from the magazine. She read Jade's face the way she had been reading it for 20 years. "It's done," Jade said. Cora turned her hand over and held Jade's properly, fingers interlaced. "I know," she said quietly. "I could tell this morning." They sat like that for the rest of the session, the machine running its steady rhythm beside them, the afternoon light moving slowly through the window, and neither of them needed to say anything more. What happened to Ryan Holloway did not happen in a single day. It unfolded the way structural damage unfolds, quietly at first, then with a momentum that could not be slowed. His 2 primary sponsors sent termination letters within 72 hours of the live stream. One cited reputational concerns. The other cited the discrimination complaints directly in writing in language that made clear legal counsel had been involved before the letter was sent. A third sponsor removed the Holloway Academy logo from their website without announcement or explanation. The Georgia State Athletic Commission opened a formal review the following Monday. The United States Judo Federation, made aware of the credential documentation Renee had presented, initiated a separate inquiry into the regional certification body that Holloway had helped found in 2012, the one that had issued his fourth-degree black belt and whose certification standards he had personally helped design. Students left. Not all at once, and not all for the same reason. Some had watched the live stream. Some had heard about it from people who had. Some had simply been waiting without knowing they were waiting for a reason to go somewhere else. 91 students withdrew their enrollment in the first month. The academy operated at a fraction of its capacity through November and December running classes for smaller and smaller groups, in a building whose lease payment remained fixed regardless of how many people showed up. Holloway Martial Arts Academy closed its doors 4 months after the tournament. A notice appeared in the window on a Wednesday morning. The equipment was listed for sale. The lease was surrendered. The Instagram account posted nothing after the week of the tournament and eventually disappeared entirely. Mike Tanaka had left the week following the event. He wrote a resignation letter that was 2 sentences long and left it on Holloway's desk on a Monday morning when the building was empty. He did not ask for a reference. He spent the following month looking at commercial spaces and running numbers. By the end of it, he had signed a lease on a ground-floor unit on Price Street, modest square footage, good floor ceiling high enough for throws. He put the mats down himself over 2 weekends with help from 3 former Holloway students who had followed him out without being asked. He offered the head instructor position to Jade Monroe. She accepted on one condition: 2 free class sessions per week for students who could not afford enrollment. Mike told her that had already been written into the plan. Before they opened, Mike drove to the former Holloway Academy building. The space had been cleared, the keys returned. Most of the mounted items had been taken or discarded. The framed photograph of Earl Monroe on the east wall had been left behind, treated as part of the building's decor, nobody's particular property. Mike took it down, wrapped it in a moving blanket, and drove it across town. He gave it to Jade on the morning they opened the new dojo. She held it in both hands for a moment, turning it slightly in the light. Then she walked to the center of the mat and set it down flat against the far wall at floor level, not hung, not elevated, not displayed behind glass. Just present at the same height as everyone who would train in that room, as if he were simply sitting there watching, the way he used to sit in the corner of the Hartridge Street basement and watch without interrupting when the work was going well. The dojo was named Monroe Tanaka Martial Arts. The sign went up on a Thursday. By the following Saturday, 18 students arrived for the first class. 6 months after the tournament, Cora Monroe came to the dojo on a Tuesday afternoon. She walked slowly with her cane the way she had walked since the second round of treatments, but she walked. Jade met her at the entrance and went with her through the main room and to the edge of the mat. The afternoon light came through the east windows in long, pale angles across the tatami. Earl's photograph sat against the far wall, the white GI catching the light the same way it always had. Cora looked at it for a moment. Then she looked around the room, the mats, the hung equipment, the framed class schedule. The particular smell of a working gym that builds over time and does not leave. She leaned slightly toward Jade. "You smell like his gym," she said. Jade looked at her grandmother. The set of her jaw, the steadiness behind her eyes, the thing people who had known Earl Monroe recognized without being able to name it. "Good," Jade said. 5 months after that, on a Saturday morning in early spring, 20 students stood in 2 rows on the Monroe Tanaka tatami, different ages, different sizes. Every background the city of Savannah held between its old streets and its cracked sidewalks and its moss-covered squares that the tourist maps remembered, and the ones they did not. Jade stood in front of them, Earl's black belt around her waist, soft with years, honest with use, carrying the weight of every session it had witnessed since the day he first tied it on. She looked at them for a moment without speaking. Then she spoke. The mat doesn't care how you look, where you're from, or what anyone told you before you walked in here. It only knows what you do when you're standing on it. She let that settle for one breath. So, let's begin.